the experts are telling you, prepare yourself. He's probably going to be in an institution. He's not going to be able to function in society. And that institution may very well be jail or something like that. And he was headed that way. Immediately before Spofford, he was very traumatized. He was very traumatized. He had very little in coping skills. He couldn't understand the world around him. Nothing made sense. And his frustration level was so high, he was shutting down. We had Johnson County Mental Health Center involved, and they were throwing everything at the family as far as resources that they could, but they can only do so much. And until he came here, no one really, I wasn't as big a part of the team in any other place that he ever went. It was mostly, let me have your child, we will take care of this, and see you at the next family therapy session in 6 weeks or something. At one point, he was in a hospital for 3 weeks, a couple of times. So it was frustrating for me as well. His behaviors were branded as willful, and he was branded as ODD, or a child who was not a good child, that he could do all this stuff and he's not doing it because he doesn't feel like it. He went from a child who was having tantrums multiple times a day, and his tantrums were violent and angry, and he'd be so sorrowful and stop communicating at all. He couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't go out in the community either because his behavior was so out of control, and he felt out of control. He scared himself a lot. With the services that he had beforehand, we had people in and out of the house constantly. The family was under a microscope. We had no normalcy, no life. We had staffing constantly trying to help us deal with this child, and he just kept getting more and more traumatized as time went on. There was nothing we could do. I was on 24-hour alert, crisis mode all the time, and it would shift back and forth between protecting my child because he was getting, I don't want to say punished, but he was having a lot of things happen to him in school that he couldn't cope with. It was frustrating because the schools had a very different philosophy than I did, and so for the two of us, for the school and for me to be able to communicate and create a comprehensive environment, it didn't happen. So he would go back and forth between a punitive environment in school and then one of let's interpret and try and problem solve at home. And it wasn't something he could do. He couldn't master that. There was never a calm, enjoying my child in any kind of activity. We didn't get involved in any community activities at all. I couldn't take him out of the house many days. His life was going to therapy appointments, going to psychiatry appointments, going to the occupational therapist, speech therapist, doing whatever we could. It wasn't soccer games and picnics and family reunions and things like that. He didn't understand what friendship was. He was ostracized from his class because of his behaviors, and so they ended up isolating him completely in a different class, so he was never around other kids. And that scared me because I wanted him to develop like other kids with some social skills. When he went into, he was very much out of control. And the people from Johnson County Mental Health Center really didn't feel safe trying to handle him. I couldn't do it on my own. So he ended up going to research, psychiatric hospital. And the behaviors that he showed there made him look as though he had been through some terrible abuse, and at least this is what it seemed like. And They didn't recognize any of the autism. They just assumed that a lot of his behaviors were more willful. He was worse when he came out of research than when he went in, and that happened a lot because the places that he was working with, they wouldn't necessarily understand what was going on. If I look back at him the way he was before coming here, this is hard to say, but he may not even be at home anymore. He was getting so violent and aggressive that we were really worried about our safety. And he was small then. He was about a foot shorter than he is now, and not nearly as strong as he is now. But he would attack and go into rages and couldn't maintain school at all. They couldn't handle him at all. So we were either probably looking at another institution, detention, and child in need of care. There were so many different things that could have come up, but they're not things a mom really wants to talk about or to be involved in. And I knew that he didn't need those things. That he just needed 24/7 so that they could baby step him out of the place he was in back to being part of the community. Until he went to Spofford, no one recognized the trauma. And when they saw it and they recognized it and they went ahead and treated him as a child who'd had trauma, he began to trust people for the first time in his life. Until then, he'd never trusted anyone except me, and I can't be with him 24/7, and it wears me out. I was not only included here, I was empowered here. I was accepted, and they said, yeah, we want to hear what you have to say. And they tried a lot of the things out that had worked at home that nobody else, the schools, the hospitals, no place else would try. Until here, nobody wanted to recognize that he had any kind of autism. And then when he came here, there was a slow transformation, and he ended up becoming a child who came home, and I don't see tantrums for, I may have one tantrum in a month, and even if he does have a tantrum, it's pretty minimal now. It's nothing like it was. They understood him here. Everyone who knows him, who knew him then and knows him now, they all said he is not the same person, not even close. The only reason I need help now is because he needs help functioning on a day-to-day basis for life skills and things like that, which he's learning, and they'll come along. But there was a long period of time in his life where he was shut down and he didn't develop during that time. And now he's just doing great. He's got friends. He never had friends before. He has friends now, and I just love it. And he's a good person, so to see him be able to be around other people and show to them that he's a good person too is exciting. I feel like we have a normal home life now, somewhat, but still much better. So in a way, Spofford not only did what they did for him, but they also took me out of a life where I was constantly on guard, constantly in crisis mode, all the time. Now I'm actually going to a life where, you know, we can do things now. We can go to fairs, we can go to art shows, we can do some things that other families do. It also affected his brother, and it affected the people at school didn't know what to do. Now he's functioning in school, and now they know what to do with him. So every walk of life, it affected everybody. The main person that he had a connection with met him before he even came to Spofford, and that was one of the big differences here, is that a couple of people who wanted to take a chance on him went to visit him and decided, yeah, he's somebody that we can do something with. And that person has remained an important person in our lives. It took a while. He was very isolated, didn't really trust anybody, didn't trust the other kids. He'd been bullied pretty badly at school. So after a month's time, each month, you could see a little difference in him, to the point where sometimes he would start to acknowledge other kids. Then he would start to play closer to them. Then he would join in. And then he ended up making a couple of friendships here that he'd never done before. It seemed the turning point happened after he left here, because he was so anxious and so scared that even coming home was scary to him, because he didn't want to fail. He didn't want to not be able to be successful at home. And so it seemed to me, looking back, that the 6 months after leaving Spofford was when I could then turn back and look at him and say, he made it, and he turned around and he's a different person. And he even could admit that. He could never do that before. He didn't have the capacity. He was so lost in his anxiety. But now he could say, yeah. So I think it's just from the time he left Spofford until, I'd say, 6 months after. And Spofford didn't exit the picture as soon as he was discharged. And that was the first time that had happened too. He's not a child who's really into stuffed animals, or he would pick a stick up and that would be his prized possession. He's not into things, but the cross connected with him in some way that, and he's never accepted religion. But that cross has meant a lot, and of anything that he's ever had, he still keeps that. He likes to make books, and in Scamps they made a book. Didn't fill it in with anything, but they made a book. And he's been filling that book up, and now he wants to make more books. So I don't know if the Goodbye book was something that inspired him to do that, or allowed him to have something that was more personal than these big books that he reads, but it was something that was truly his. So yeah, it's nice. And we combine that with the book that he got when he first came in. We did the same thing, where we took pictures of all the people and the area and the rooms, so that when he came here he wouldn't be so scared. And they're together, so it's kind of fun to see them side by side. The people didn't change, the adults, but he did. And a lot of that stuff is really helped by medication. And so what's left over, what medication doesn't help with, that's where Spofford came in. I thought I was a great parent, and I couldn't figure out why nothing was working. And then along come Mr. Dickerson and some of the other folks and taught me a lot. It was great.